The World Bank is planning to free up around $500 million in frozen aid for Afghanistan's ailing healthcare sector. The money will help address medicine and staffing shortages in hospitals where workers are struggling to cope with people suffering from malnutrition and rising COVID-19 infections. Paolo Montecillo has the details.
Faced with severe shortages of supplies and manpower, workers at this hospital in the Afghan capital are pushing their meager resources to the limit.
We have a huge number of patients who are malnourished. The incubator should be reserved for one, but we put 3 or 4 babies in it.
3 months after the Taliban takeover, Afghanistan's already struggling healthcare system is crumbling. Hospitals in the country relied heavily on foreign money. But many of those taps are running dry as governments refuse to recognize the nation's new leadership and suspended humanitarian aid.
We are facing problems with our staff payments. The other problems we are facing in this hospital are shortages of medicine and food for malnourished children.
The World Bank is proposing an interim solution. They're reportedly finalizing a deal to deliver $500 million in previously frozen aid to humanitarian groups working in the country. The move, hammered out with the help of the US and the UN, will free up cash to pay for medicine and medical equipment, as well as salaries for doctors, nurses, and other healthcare professionals. It's a much-needed boost in a country where only 7% of people are vaccinated against COVID-19. But donor groups say Afghanistan's needs are far greater.
People who don't get enough food will get sick. If the health system is not able to deal with the fragility of health, then this is again a problem. So I'm concerned about the interconnectivity of the food, health, water, sanitation, electricity, and educational system.
According to the UN, more than half of Afghanistan's population doesn't have enough to eat. And that's likely to get worse in the coming months, as colder weather makes food even harder to come by. That means any money Afghanistan receives will need to be stretched even further than before. Paolo Montecillo, TRT World.
For more, let's bring in Torek Farhadi. He's a former economic advisor for the IMF, the World Bank and the UN. He was also a former advisor for the Afghan government. Thank you very much for being with us today. Is this a good step, first of all, and could this be a precursor to other steps that will be taken in unfreezing money and aids and reserves for Afghanistan?
It is a necessary step. It is a long overdue step. Afghanistan was receiving about $4 billion of aid to its budget just before the collapse of the government. And that's why this money was also in reserve at the World Bank, at the Afghanistan Reconstruction Trust Fund, which was managing this kind of aid, especially also paying the salaries in the health clinics during COVID. Suddenly, because of the political situation, the World Bank found itself, because the US has an important vote at the board of the World Bank, it found itself obligated to stop its programs in Afghanistan. But the people the World Bank was helping before the collapse of the government are the same people, and the poverty has skyrocketed because nobody is receiving salaries. Prices of important items have almost doubled, and the hospital you just saw, there was another report that they have cut the trees in their gardens in order to use the wood for heating.
Torek, one of the biggest obstacles to this aid program is actually US sanctions, with financial institutions not really wanting to be exposed. I mean, how likely is it for the US to retreat on this, given the degree of urgency?
The US sanctions are causing a vicious chain of poverty and misery in Afghanistan today, unfortunately. And what it seems to the rest of the world is the US is playing politics, using the money that's frozen at the Federal Reserve of New York, the Afghan Central Bank's reserves, And because of its weight at the World Bank and its importance with the international banking system, Afghanistan is almost cut off from the international banking system right now. No bank wants to work with Afghanistan. There are licenses for humanitarian agencies given by the US Treasury Department to work with Afghanistan, but banks are wary of using those channels because with other countries and in the past they have been bitten with billion-dollar fines. As a result, even Afghans around the world, there are 4 million Afghans around the world, even if 1 million of them wanted to send remittances to Afghanistan, it's almost impossible now because no bank will transfer money to Afghanistan, and the traditional Western unions and other organizations also are shy of giving this service.
Torek, okay, one last question very quickly because we're running out of time. Rise in extremism is actually one of the main concerns for the international community, for the neighboring economies. Are we likely to see a resurgence of it in Afghanistan?
Look, extremism comes from ideology, but when man-made disaster is manufactured with creating an economic crisis, it is not well managed politically, people turn against those powers that have all the powers and can make the rules for the world, I would say. And you can feel it that people are very disappointed at the way the United States has left Afghanistan, and now it's blocking money that is much needed for humanitarian reasons in Afghanistan. And to people outside, it looks like politics, and it doesn't look good for the United States.
Torek Farhadi, many thanks for this interesting update.